stay there. Okay, okay, all good. Yes.
So, good morning everyone, and welcome to this conference, Building Ukraine's Future in Times of War. Very happy to see you all here. My name is Gerlinde, and I'm the head of the Global Security Hub at the Friedrich Naumann Foundation's Brussels office. And I will be kicking off the conference for today. We have on the agenda, we have several discussions and the keynote about Ukraine's future amidst Russia's ongoing war of aggression. And the overall topic that we want to discuss with this is how Europe and the transatlantic partnership can not only support Ukraine on its path to a military victory, but in the meantime also strengthen Ukraine's resilience and promote its path towards the European and transatlantic community. And what we also really want to discuss and emphasize is also the added value of having Ukraine as part of that community. I think that's a very important point. We will do that with MEP Bernard Guetta and two connected panel discussions. The first one is on the integration of Ukraine into EU and NATO. And we have another discussion about strengthening Ukraine's societal resilience and lessons that can be learned also for other European countries. During the coffee break, we will also show a short documentary that our colleagues in Ukraine have made about a local mayor and his struggles in these times and how he tries to keep his town going. That's it in terms of the structure. Some short housekeeping. It's a public event, so please feel free to share it widely, also online. We're also streaming it live, so I think that's always good to know. It's also interactive in the sense that we would like you to also engage in this discussion, so feel free to think about some questions and make use of the time that we have for that during the discussions. And last but not least, I would like to thank Promote Ukraine, our partner in this event, for helping us and supporting us in bringing us all together here. On that note, I will hand over to our keynote speaker, Bernard Guetta, who is a former journalist, but now just started the second mandate in the European Parliament, sits on the Foreign Affairs Committee, and is a very vocal advocate for a strong European role in the support for Ukraine. We are very happy that he could join us to give us some first impressions and his first takes, and we can use that later to discuss that further in both sessions. So please, Mr. Guetta, I hand over the floor to you.
Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, friends and colleagues, we know what we wish for. We wish for accession and accession, Ukraine accession to the EU and Ukraine accession to NATO. Our wish is clear, but unfortunately, we won't be alone to decide. The United States will, how could I say that politely? Let's say the United States will co-decide with us. And so, to assess the future relations of Ukraine with the EU and NATO, we need to know what will happen in 3 weeks. In the first scenario, everything is tragically clear. If Donald Trump is elected, this man will not wait until he takes office to seal with Vladimir Putin a division of Ukraine based on the model of the two Germanys or the two Koreas. De facto, the Ukrainian territories occupied by Russian troops would go to the Kremlin, which, in exchange, how nice, would commit not to cross the demarcation line. This would be Ukraine's defeat and Vladimir Putin's victory, but a debate would open up immediately, a debate both fundamental and furious. Should Ukraine join NATO or not? A Ukraine amputated by the so-called peace agreement, in fact, an appeasement agreement. Assuming that this agreement reached between the Russian president and his friend, Donald, did not bar it from membership, Ukraine would be more eager than ever to join. The Europeans, for their part, would have a vital interest that Ukraine become the 33rd member of the Atlantic Alliance, because the Ukrainians would then benefit from a level of protection that we, Europeans, cannot grant them today. For both Ukraine and the European Union, this enlargement of NATO would be the only way of preventing Vladimir Putin from trying to rebuild the Russian Empire by soon marching again on Kiev. In short, Europeans should prepare to fight this battle without waiting for the 5th of November results, and in so doing, they should keep two things in mind. One is that Donald Trump would not be easily persuaded to accept Ukraine's accession to a NATO he no longer sees as necessary, to put it mildly or diplomatically. The other thing to keep in mind is that the Europeans will have to do more than to tighten the Western ranks under the American umbrella, because this is a new century, a new era in which the umbrella is not so protective. The United States is already focusing on the Chinese challenge. This president would certainly wish to hasten this process and might be tempted to altogether turn his back on the Atlantic Alliance. Under a new Trump presidency, the Europeans would have to learn to exist on their own, to speed up, to really speed up the creation of their common defense, and to define new modes and degrees of integration. They would have to reinvent the accession process in order to open their doors as quickly as possible to Ukraine, and in order to be able also to immediately form a common front with our neighbor and friend. To tell you the truth, the aim would be first to rely on the Ukrainian defense system to shorten the time necessary to build a European defense. And of course, the aim would be also mainly to send a message to Russia that should it attack Ukraine again, it would be attacking the whole Union. In the Trump scenario, the objective of the Europeans should be, without delay, to integrate Ukraine into the European Union, and if possible, but it would be much more difficult, also into the Atlantic Alliance. But what if Harris wins? In this second scenario, everything would be both more reassuring and more complicated. There would be no need to fear that the American administration would come to an agreement with the Kremlin at the expense of Ukraine, that is, at the expense of the entire Europe. Nor would it be conceivable that the United States would suddenly start to discredit the Atlantic Alliance or want to leave it overnight. With Kamala Harris, the European Union would not be faced with the impossible challenge of reinventing itself in just a few months, but but because there is a but. But actually, would the differences between President Harris and President Trump be so deep? Well, unlike Trump, Harris has no admiration for Vladimir Putin, certainly not at all. Unlike him, she doesn't see the European Union as a rival that America should undo. But she's Californian and was still rather young, very young actually, when the Berlin Wall fell. We know that they are completely different, but for Harris, like for Trump, the United States must turn its eyes toward Asia and not towards Europe. And there is more. Everything indicates that Harris would like to quickly bring the Ukrainians to a compromise with Russia that could be rather similar and maybe even very similar to the one prepared by her Republican opponent. So let's see the reality and not our wishes. If Harris acted decently and politely enough so that Europe doesn't seem nor feel betrayed, several European capitals would approve this approach. And more than that, on the right, on the left, and in the center, a large part of the 27 member state citizens would also applaud it. In the relief that this illusion of detente would bring, it would become difficult to plead for Ukraine's entry into the Atlantic Alliance or even into the European Union. Just as the election of Trump could force the European Union to assume its political responsibilities, the election of Kamala Harris would deeper divide the 27 and could lead them to a new and dangerous phase of procrastination. So again, let's face the reality. As unpleasant, as sad as it would be, instead of NATO membership, and I hate to say so, the Europeans might unfortunately have to plead in Washington for Western security guarantees for Ukraine. This would be less difficult, less impossible to obtain from the White House, and rather than trying to immediately open the doors of the European Union to our Ukrainian friends, we Europeans might have to increase dramatically the number of civil and military cooperation agreements with them in order to strengthen our border with Russia and use the tools of gradual integration to pave the way to accession. Ladies and gentlemen, Harris or Trump, the 5th of November will put us, Europeans, to the test. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Guetta. Can I invite you? We're going to start with the first panel now. Can I invite you, or that chair is probably best. Yeah, and then if you could join as well. So thank you very much for that. That was a very good start of the discussion, I think, and it's very clearly outlined the dilemmas that we have to deal with and the risks that might be coming up, especially also of that procrastination that you mentioned, which I think also in Europe is a big issue. We're going to move into the first panel discussion now on the theme of Ukraine's path to the EU or into the EU and NATO, challenges and prospects. And we're going to discuss that with three speakers. On my left, your right, is first Gerlinde Niehus, who's an international security expert, has recently retired from NATO, where in her last position she was the Deputy Director for Defense and Security Cooperation. Also worked a lot with Ukraine. Thank you for joining.
Pleasure.
Next to her is Mariia Golub, who is the Ukraine envoy to Brussels on behalf of the Servant of the People Party, so the political representative here in Brussels of Servant of the People. Very nice that you could join as well. Welcome to the panel.
My pleasure.
As I said, what we want to discuss in this panel is the road ahead for Ukraine as it seeks to join both the EU and NATO. So we want to look into the critical challenges, but as I mentioned in my opening, also look at the benefits of Ukraine's integration into the EU and NATO, both for Ukraine, but also for Europe and the transatlantic partners. And connected to that, we would also like to discuss what kind of security actor Ukraine will be in the future European security landscape. We'll do that by having a 5-minute opening from, well, actually, Mariia and Gerlinde, because we've already had an opening from you. And as soon as those are over, we'll have a discussion. So feel free to jump in with your questions straight away. I have a few, but I would also welcome very much your questions. So we make it an interactive discussion. We're going to wrap up a little later, 10:30. Because we also started a bit later. Gerlinde, can I ask you to start with your first input and your first take on this topic?
Okay, thank you, and thanks for having me. Really pleasure to be with you. And I must say I commend everyone, and in this instance, Support Ukraine and Naumann Foundation for really raising the profile of the topic of Ukraine. Because in many ways, when I see the media these days, it really dismays me that the coverage has not been there where it used to be. I mean, we see a lot rightly so, on the conflict in the Middle East, but we need to keep the topic of Ukraine very prominent. That brings me to my first point. Why? Because in many ways, I think the fate of Ukraine is also our fate. We are fighting. Ukraine is fighting for its freedom, for its liberty. But in doing so, they are fighting for our freedom, our liberty. So we need to see the fate of Ukraine, its future, its destiny, as a hopefully democratic, independent country, as vital to the Euro-Atlantic area, as vital to our security. So we need to see it in the geostrategic concept. That's what I'm saying. Because if there is a scenario where Putin were to win in Ukraine, this would not only subjugate Ukraine and sort of rob it of its future, it would also be a sterling invitation to all other despots of this planet to imitate him. And we're already seeing this. And China is watching to see what it can do for Taiwan. Maduro is watching in Latin America what it can do on the neighboring Guyana, and so on and so on. So we need to really understand that what is at stake in Ukraine is crucial for Ukraine, but it's also crucial for us and our security and our well-being, and ultimately also for the security of democracies worldwide. Then my second point, just to put this a bit in context, because we are talking about the future of Ukraine and its relation with the Euro-Atlantic institutions. In many ways, clearly, we have gone a long road in Ukraine. I mean, on the NATO side and also on the EU side. These relations started in the 90s when Ukraine became independent. It was, I think, on occasions a rather also bumpy road with a bit of back and forth. On the NATO side, a key decision was when Ukraine asked for membership in 2008 at the NATO summit in Bucharest. Allies ended with a very problematic decision, namely to say that Ukraine will become a member of NATO, with the membership action plan being the next step. So that was meant as a compromise, because at Bucharest was also President Putin, who was furious about the idea of inviting Ukraine, as you can imagine, and that was then the compromise to which they reached, clearly in view of, let's put it bluntly, appeasing him. Now, what that of course also meant was, in many ways, an open invitation to put into to meddle as long as Ukraine is not protected by NATO. Yeah, because the signal seen from the Russian side is, well, as long as they're not there, we can do everything to derail it. Yeah, and that started in Georgia in 2008. It continued in 2014 with the Crimean annexation, and it continued then in 22 with the full-out invasion. So then also, clearly also on the Ukrainian side, at one point Ukraine decided to pursue a policy on non-alignment, which we from the NATO side fully respected, although under the surface I can tell you the cooperation continued fairly well and intensely, but with less prominence. And then following the annexation of the Crimean Peninsula, I think at that time it's fair to say that the reaction of the collective West when it came to punishing Russia was fairly limited, with more or less limited sanctions, but then in many ways a reset taking place. Also on the NATO side, I mean, we did something more to support Ukraine. We formed the Comprehensive Assistance Package Ukraine at the Warsaw Summit in 2016. We gave more military cooperation support, but clearly not to the extent we probably should have done had we anticipated what then happened in 22. So clearly these were a bit the sort of bumpy road on the NATO side. On the EU side, clearly I think the key experience was the Euromaidan revolution in 2014 with the ousting of Yanukovych, and then a clearly more European path with the new leadership. So, but where do we stand now with Ukraine at war? On the NATO side, clearly Ukraine has asked for membership since long, actually since 2019. Since it is in their constitution. But with Ukraine at war, NATO has not, or NATO allies have not agreed to invite Ukraine to become a member. So largely what we have been doing was intensifying practical cooperation as best as possible, and also improving somewhat of the political relationship. On the political relationship, I mean, in essence, what we did is at the summit in Vilnius, we created the NATO-Ukraine Council. So instead of the NATO-Ukraine Commission, which we had before, the NATO-Ukraine Council, where Ukraine sits in alphabetical order among all other allies as an equal partner. The added value for Ukraine is that Ukraine can also call for meetings of the NATO-Ukraine Council, because it is an equal member, like all other members of the alliance, and President Zelensky has done this on several occasions. So we created this NATO-Ukraine Council, and it was also decided at the Vilnius summit last year, 23, that Ukraine no longer needs the membership action plan as the next step, so that it has done already so many reform processes that it can integrate into NATO once allies are ready to agree on inviting it. But so far, I should add to my personal displeasure, NATO did not have the courage to invite Ukraine, or not even to invite Ukraine to start accession talks, which I think is a proposal made rightly so by among others by Lithuanian colleagues. So I'm looking over there. So I think on the political side, some progress, but certainly not the desired end result yet. On the practical side, I think the efforts have been somewhat more intense, and because we have used the Comprehensive Assistance Package CAP to really boost cooperation with Ukraine. NATO was not allowed to provide, or not even not to coordinate lethal assistance to Ukraine, because at the time allies feared that this would bring the alliance too close into the conflict. So that was the birth, if you wish, of this Rammstein format, which is coordinating support to Ukraine, based in Rammstein, close to Wiesbaden in Germany. But we were allowed to do, NATO was allowed to do non-lethal assistance, ranging from medical supplies via lubricants, oil, gas, generators, etc., etc. But then, in particular, I mean, we have NATO has then intensified the long-term reform efforts with Ukraine, notably in preparing Ukraine to be fully interoperable with NATO. So once a membership happens, Ukraine will be interoperable with NATO forces. So there's a lot of emphasis on that, and we can go into further details if you wish. I think the only other really important decision which was made at the Washington summit was to set up the so-called NATO security assistance and training for Ukraine, which is taking over some of the coordination function from the Rammstein group. The main reason, to be blunt, was that they wanted to do that coordination and support Ukraine Trump-proofed. Yeah? So to avoid a situation where, in the event that Trump is elected, it could be derailed. Because now it has been agreed by 32 nations, so it can only be stopped by 32 nations agreeing to stop it. You know? So in that sense, I think it's safe. So NATO is now the one led by a three-star general in Wiesbaden, leading this coordination for training and material support, including the logistics. But all this is done from outside Ukraine, so it's done in Wiesbaden. Yeah, and then very briefly on the EU side, I trust Mariia will talk about that a bit more. The EU decided rightly to start accession discussions with Ukraine. So Ukraine has made some progress, but we are not yet there, and there's unfinished business. And perhaps we can discuss what could be the steps forward in finishing that business, because you already gave some ideas how this could look like. With that, over to you, Jérôme.
Thank you so much, Gerlinde. That gave a really good overview of the long and bumpy road, and also the geopolitical context in which all of this takes place. And I'm sure we will have some topics that we want to discuss further in the discussion afterwards. But first we move to Mariia. Mariia, could you give us your take on this topic and your introductory statement?
Thank you very much. Indeed, it's a pleasure to be here with you today, and thanks for having me here. And this discussion indeed is very timely, as rightly mentioned, and thanks for this brilliant overview to both of the distinguished panelists. Now, EU is probably facing one of the biggest challenges in its modern history, and now, even more than ever, we need serious reflections and serious discussions and find common solutions how to face and address these challenges. I will start by reiterating a very horizontal and clear message that Ukraine indeed is the key element of our joint European security, and I'm now very pleased to observe that these two tracks, the EU integration track and NATO integration track of Ukraine, they are aligned. Unfortunately, I remember times when they were artificially split, and I can tell you it took us some extra efforts then to bridge this gap between the EU integration track and NATO integration track, but the previous speaker has brilliantly described where we are now, and I'm very pleased to see that there are very positive developments on both sides. First of all, let me say that Ukraine indeed has achieved a lot in terms of EU integration and NATO integration, and under very challenging circumstances. Despite the full-fledged aggression, despite the war, despite the daily attacks of Russian Federation on the critical infrastructure, I just read today in the morning reports that there were around 80 military strikes on the territory of Ukraine just happened during the night. Ukraine keeps up to its commitments on the reform track. we indeed have done a lot in terms of political association and what is more important in terms of economic integration into the European Union. And I assume here we have many experts who are familiar with the process of the accession talks and association talks. And I just mentioned that this, when Ukraine was granted the candidate status, and then when the EU has rightly decided to open the negotiation talk with Ukraine, this is not only the geopolitical gesture of big significance, but it's also a well-deserved recognition of the results achieved so far, both for the EU and same for NATO. I will probably try to focus on the benefits, because indeed Ukraine is not only the key security provider, and this will continue for the upcoming years, but also this EU accession is beneficial for both, for the Ukraine and for the European Union. Not only in terms of money, but first of all in terms of investment. That's why Ukraine keeps advocating for solid security guarantees from the West, because security guarantees are key for investment. And whenever time is right for the peace talks and for the full-fledged reconstruction of Ukraine, this is a huge potential which should not be underestimated. But this can only happen if the solid security guarantees are in place. Second thing, surprise, surprise, Ukraine, even under the current challenging circumstances, continues to be the key provider of the IT services to Ukraine. And this is just one example why cooperation, economic cooperation, and quick accession of Ukraine into the European Union is beneficial for the EU. Same, for example, for the R&D developments. Now, of course, it's very much linked to the military sector, but Ukraine keeps investing into its research and development sector, even under the current circumstances. We keep saying that Ukraine continues to be the breadbasket of Europe, and this is also true. We are very grateful to the EU for the so-called solidarity lanes, when we were helped to keep our agri lines, keep supplying and keep trading with the EU. With our agricultural products, although there were, of course, issues with our neighbors. We can discuss this later on. But Ukraine is also continues to be the brain basket of the world. And that's why we keep advocating for the smooth integration of Ukraine into the European Union, because, of course, we are very much interested to keep our brains at home, or at least make sure that these Ukrainian brains, even if taken abroad, they will continue to serve, let's say, for the benefits of Ukraine. These are just a very small example. And of course, when it comes to NATO and security, defense cooperation, now Ukraine offers a huge potential of first of all, investment into our military and defense sector. And second thing, let's not forget, this is very unfortunate, but this is true. Ukraine now has probably the best real combating experience in the whole world. Unfortunately so, but we had the opportunity to test probably all the possible modern weapons, which are now still somewhere under development. And this is how Ukraine can contribute to the forward-looking strategies of NATO and of the defense union in the EU. These are just very small examples, but I will try to conclude that we offered a very solid, very detailed plan how to end up this war, and it's still on the table. This plan is called Peace Formula, as presented by the President Zelensky. All the points are still relevant, are valid, and they are still remain the key for the just and long-lasting peace, not only in Ukraine but in Europe. And I tend to believe that the peace formula will also remain the key document for the upcoming negotiations when the time is right. I will only conclude by saying that challenges, they always go hand in hand with opportunities, and what is important is, of course, to have plan A, B, C, but also to come with our own solution. I mean, our joint solution, how we can address these upcoming challenges. And again, Ukraine has already demonstrated a very good partnership will to stick to the commitments it has taken. That's why I only hope that, of course, we will need to talk about the negotiations, but we will talk about the negotiations from the position of strength.
I think you can keep this because I'm wired.
Does this one work? Yeah, okay.
Bottle of water, please.
Oh, yeah. Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you very much, Mariia, for that. And I think that's, you already started a bit the discussion also about the benefits, which I think is very good, and which we would definitely like to discuss more further on in the discussion. But before, I mean, one thing that you just mentioned, challenges go hand in hand with opportunities. Maybe we can go into those challenges first a bit before we talk more about the opportunities, and talk a bit about the kind of critical issues that Ukraine, but also the EU and NATO have to overcome in order to have Ukraine accessing accessing the European Union and NATO. Maybe it's a question to all speakers. What, from your point of view, are those challenges? I think there are kind of two tracks. There's the track of harmonization, getting ready for membership, being compliant with legislation or with standards in NATO, but also the political agreement. So a country can be fully ready. We've seen it with Finland and Sweden, and still there can be difficulties with political agreement amongst allies and members of the Union. What are your thoughts on that? Maybe we can start with Mr. Guetta. We start in the order that we had the first contributions. Then Gerlinde, maybe from a NATO point of view, and then after that, Mariia, I would be interested to hear your point of view, how that looks from a political point of view.
Okay, so I understand that the question is what are the conditions for Ukraine accession to the EU?
Indeed, yeah.
Okay.
Critical challenges.
Okay, so I would say first that we are not at all in a normal, usual situation. The EU has a very defined and clear and long accession process. We cannot use this accession process in the case of Ukraine. It's not possible, simply. Why? Because Ukraine is at war, or Russia is at war against Ukraine, and because we need to support our neighbor and friend immediately and completely. And so we will have, I hope we will, and in any case we should have, to simply forget the usual accession process and to invent something completely different. What could it be? Actually, we already have some very interesting ideas on the table. The French president invented 3 years ago la communauté politique européenne. Well, what is it? The community of all the democratic European states, members or not of the European Union. And it was clearly invented to open a first step to a full accession. We could use this new forum, which for Ukraine, And we already use it, or don't we?
Yeah, we did in Moldova.
And so we could already, and we will, and we are already using it. But we should use it for probably specific aims or tasks. With Ukraine, the full cooperation would be first in the area of security and defense and war, of course, because you need us, but we need you, certainly. And so we will have to build something on that, and then we will have to build economic cooperations, industrial, and so on, but mainly as the first step in the security cooperation, and specifically in the weapons industries, specifically on that. So it will be already war and industry, and it will be already a rather quick entrance, accession to the European Union, but a specific one. And then we will see, and then we will build something more, many things more. So I would say that discussing about Ukraine and the EU in the usual terms is a real fantasy, actually. Let's forget it. Let's invent something completely different, completely new, and certainly needed.
Thank you for that. Gerlinde.
Yeah, challenges. Let me focus on three I can think of. I mentioned before that I think we need to see Ukraine in the geostrategic context, and in that sense, I think a lot of the issues are related to how we, our political leaders, our political institutions, deal with Mr. Putin. And what we have seen in the past years, by and large, I would call it an escalation avoidance approach. Yeah? Thinking always that anything which the West would do could lead to an escalation with Putin. In my mind, and I've been working with Russia also for a long time, this is a fundamental misunderstanding of Mr. Putin. Mr. Putin recognizes and respects strengths, and he exploits weaknesses. And hesitation and the lack of courage to do certain things for him is a weakness. So whenever our political leaders are not doing what is necessary to give Ukraine what it needs in order to win this fight on its soil, we are actually falling in his trap. So in my mind, the first challenge would be to replace this escalation avoidance approach, which we have seen, with a coherent containment strategy vis-à-vis Russia. That's the first point. And this is a hot potato, yeah? Not only in NATO, probably beyond NATO. Then second, clearly, ever since Russia's full-out invasion of Ukraine, the West, the EU, NATO allies, the US have given unprecedented support to Ukraine. I mean, military support largely from the US, financial support from the European Union, and through this Rammstein format, which I mentioned, I mean, 56 nations, NATO nations, and many partners, including countries such as Japan or Australia, are contributing. So, and that's probably also the reason why Ukraine is still in the fight, because had they not received all this support over the now close to 3 years or 2.5 years, they probably would not be able to fight any longer at this scale. In addition to the political leadership and courage and everything which was required on the Ukrainian side. But here comes my big but. Although these 56 nations and many international organizations have given Ukraine all this unprecedented support, it has been insufficient so far. Insufficient so far. Why? See above, because of this escalation mentality, and probably also because there is not necessarily an awareness of the geostrategic relevance of what happens in Ukraine to what is relevant for all of us. Yeah. So that's why my next aspect would be we need to finally overcome these hesitations. I mean, the Germans, why not giving Taurus? We could have done this years ago. The caveats which are given to the weapons which are given to Ukraine. Why do we tell Ukraine how to use them? Ukraine will, of course, observe international laws in using these weapons. When the weapons enter Ukraine territory, they are Ukrainian weapons by default. So why do we pretend, or some pretend, they are still American or German weapons? They aren't. They are Ukrainian weapons. So let them use them the way they deem appropriate. But what we are doing so far is, I mean, we give them the weapons, we tie one hand on the back and say, now you fight. So it's kind of bordering ridiculous if it weren't that sad. So overcome these shortcomings, because in many ways, a Ukraine victory on its own terms in Ukraine is also the best formula for regime change in Moscow. So we also need to get that clear in our head. And then my third point, we need to get the courage to invite Ukraine for accession talks into NATO. We should do it. Because the line of, we cannot do this as long as the war is there. What does it tell Mr. Putin? It tells Mr. Putin, oh, this is great, I just have to continue the war endlessly, and they will never be invited. You know, I mean, just make a basic understanding of the way Putin thinks. Yeah. So we should have the courage to invite Ukraine to start accession talks on the NATO side, and I would argue we should also invite Ukraine to join the EU for the same reason.
Thank you very much for that, Gerlinde, and especially also on that last point, the opening of accession talks. That is an interesting point, because keeping this conflict going is, of course, in the interest of Russia, and it has been doing that in many other countries as well, successfully, unfortunately. Yeah. Mariia, over to you. More from the political point of view and from the Ukrainian point of view, what are those critical challenges that you see?
Yes, thank you. I will probably point out 3 of them, although there are more, and I will start with the first one, which is, in my view, political will or lack of political will. You call it lack of courage, I call it lack of political will, which is key in both processes. For the NATO accession talks, same for the EU. It's so very clear, when there is a political will, there is always a political way, both in terms of concrete solutions, concrete decision, but I will not shy away from saying when there is a political will in Ukraine, all the reform processes, they go really smoothly. Key appointments which were sort of conditions, 7 recommendations mentioned by the EU Commission a few years ago, other recommendations made by the EU to Ukraine. When there is a will on the highest political level, then the implementation goes really smoothly. So the more political will is demonstrated on the leadership level in Washington, in Brussels, in key capitals, but also in Kyiv, the better these processes will be organized. Second thing is, unfortunately, I need to mention this, lack of unity is still there. There was a great unity, and we will be forever grateful to the EU and to our NATO alliance for this unity, which really helped us and help us to keep fighting this war. But unfortunately, this unity is missed when it comes to the strategic decisions. And this brings us to my first point, lack of political will. And last but not least, the challenge is still there, and this is probably the elephant in the room. This is the lack of strategic vision. So indeed, how we can reinforce or reinvigorate or slightly update, I would not use the word completely change or invent, but slightly update the current enlargement policy of the European Union.
So
and
you are
it's
more European than I.
because it's not only about Ukraine. We need to probably see the bigger picture. Moldova is knocking on the door, but same for the Balkan countries. We need to find probably a very agile solution how to reinforce the enlargement process from the EU side. But same probably for the NATO accession talks. Better agile solutions are needed, not only in the view of Ukraine, but also taking into consideration what you have mentioned. Other strategic geopolitical players are looking very closely what is happening now on the battlefield.
Thank you, Mariia, for that very realistic point of view. That's always good to use as a basis for the further discussion that we will have. If there are any questions already, we can start, and then we slowly work our way more towards the benefits of Ukrainian accession and integration. I'll start there in the back, and I see another question here and also there. I'm afraid I will have to take the microphone or a microphone myself, unless somebody.
Speak up. I don't know if it's
Yeah, that's okay. No, sorry. It would be better to use a microphone because we have a live stream.
working. Yeah, thank you. My name is Arne Janssen. I work for the German County Association. So we have strong ties bilaterally with a lot of subnational actors in Ukraine. I just wanted to build up on the very interesting discussion we are having here and on the European Union integration and enlargement politics here. It's good to hear that Ukraine is, of course, besides the war, preparing the alignment process and be ready once the European Union or the NATO is ready. But focusing on the European Union here, maybe a question for Mr. Guetta in the first place, is the European Union in the condition and the legislation we are at the moment even ready to absorb or to welcome a country, a big country like Ukraine, so many people, given the complicated system of the council, like you know it best. Don't we need to start or finish a reform of the European Union before we can even get yet another member under the same condition, under the same rules into the European Union? That's my question. Thanks.
Thank you. We'll take them one by one. Mr. Guetta, would you like to answer that? So is the EU in its current state ready to absorb Ukraine, or do we need some kind of internal reform first?
You know, there are many problems with the remarks you just made. First, you're right. We are not ready to integrate such a big, rich, intellectually and not only country. We are not ready, but we have to. Second point, in any case, our public opinions in many member states, at least 3 or 5, would refuse the accession process of Ukraine immediately. So we have to find a way between the necessities and the possibilities. And this way, on my eyes, is very clear. Again, we have to invent something new. Because we have to be able to say to our political parties and to our public opinions, newspapers, and so on, well, this is not an accession. This is a necessity. And the necessity is to support Ukraine, because if Vladimirovich Putin would win, it would be a threat, if not a defeat, for the entire European Union. So the middle way, by the way, is rather clear. Cooperation and in as many areas as possible. And that we can do it very quickly, almost immediately, because what is it? Actually, this is bilateral cooperation between the European Union and Ukraine. But those bilateral cooperation would open the way clearly for annexation process. So let's not be intimidated by the difficulties, because the difficulties are there, the necessities are there, and we will find the middle way. We will have to.
I think, is there anyone, Gerlinde, would you like to say
perhaps
something?
just a short remark here. I mean, I remember in 2004 when both EU and NATO had the so-called Big Bang enlargement, taking in 7 new members, on both sides in parallel. And at the time, it was seen largely as a geostrategic move in order to strengthen stability and also arguably prosperity in the Euro-Atlantic area. And I think this is the mindset we need today again. So we need to see it as a way of largely anchoring Ukraine and probably some others in the Euro-Atlantic family in order to spread stability and prosperity and also democratic standards. And to the colleague there from Germany, I mean, this argument we need to reform first before we enlarge. We had this so many times, and even France no longer insists on this. So I think we moved away from that.
I like even France.
Probably a very short comment from my side. Actually, we can do both. I mean, probably we should do both. We should continue smooth and quick accession of Ukraine into the European Union, while European Union should take a courage and once again leadership to start reforming itself internally. And probably the European Union, correct me if I'm wrong, but will never be 100% ready to absorb a big and very rich country indeed, like Ukraine, but that's why I mentioned the bigger picture. Ukraine is not alone and will probably not be alone joining the European Union. So the better and the earlier we start these reflections on the bilateral level, the better prepared we are. And probably, again, you will be surprised, but Ukraine has never officially asked for any fast track. And the very recent comments from our Deputy Prime Minister in charge of the EU and NATO integration, from the political leadership of Ukraine, they are the same. We are ready to do what needs to be done from our side. They have started this official process of screening, and what I hear from the EU Commission colleagues, they were so very positively surprised how well prepared and well organized Ukrainian team is. So I have big hopes that these two processes will really go smoothly.
I would like to give you an example. We are not ready in Brussels, nor in the 27 capitals, for a new British accession process. By the way, London neither. That's a fact. But there is another fact. We need immediately military cooperation with London. And so we will organize, I hope so at least, I'm almost sure, we will organize this cooperation, this military cooperation, on a bilateral basis between the European Union and London. It will be clear, not that difficult, and very fruitful.
Thank you very much for those reflections. We move on to the second question. Yeah.
Thank you for the floor. Dmitry Shkuko, National News Agency of Ukraine. Mr. Borrell recently asked all of us to think big when we're speaking about the defense and security of Europe. Thank you very much for that excellent presentation, but I think we right now need to look more to the European capabilities than American assistance to defend Europe, because time is there. My comment is first to Gerlinde. The issue is that it is not the matter of Mr. Putin, his policy, that we have such big unrest and the war in Europe. As we thinking big about that, the issue is that we are now observing the last stage of dissolving of Russian Empire. You know, and that means that Russians are not attacking us not because they are like bad guys, but they are attacking us because they are not competitive in the modern world. That means we will be expanding more and more and more, while we will not be stopped. And that is a challenge not as for Ukraine, but for Europe. And I believe that we need to realize that. I just want to know what you're thinking about that. And to Mr. Guetta, if I may. I absolutely share your concern about the difficulties both in process of integration to NATO and EU. But can you say, and did you think, what could be an alternative to that process? What could happen if Ukraine will not, for instance, get into NATO? Just a simple figure. Right now we have already like 600,000 Russian troops wounded and killed in Ukraine. It is not Ukrainian statistics, it's statistics of British intelligence.
But I already answered this question
many
times.
Well, just a second, I just finalize. Mr. Borrell, speaking in the United States, mentioned that EU was asked to prepare like quick readiness forces in a number of 330,000 troops. And Europeans discovered that all 27 member states have like 1,500,000 troops, and only 10% of them are combat ready. So just imagine what will happen if such a forces like Ukrainian one will be out of the game, and all these Russian forces will be flowing to Europe. Will be Europe ready to resist? Because it is not enough to have weapons. You need to have a political will to defend and to use it. Thank you so much.
Just to clarify on the last question, so that is, does Europe have enough capabilities to counter a Russian attack?
Yeah,
itself. Yeah. Okay.
The short answer is no.
So just to summarize,
that's clear.
Just to summarize, so question for you, Gerlinde: are we witnessing the last stage of the dissolution of the Russian Empire, and what does that mean for Europe? And for you, does Europe have the capabilities to counter a Russian attack?
Well, you know, I don't have a crystal ball, and what I'm reading, and I'm clearly also reading that line of thought, and I hear it from Ukrainians as well, that they think we are seeing the last sort of dissolution of the Russian Empire. I'm not so sure about that, you know, because Putin, in spite of all the sanctions and all the measures which were taken, seems to have the grip to power very, very firmly. He's pursuing his imperialistic revisionist policy and a brutal war of aggression in Ukraine, but also, let's not forget, a shadow war against all of us, with more sabotage, more assassinations, more cyber attacks, etc., which he, of course, also does in Ukraine. So I'm not so in that sense, optimistic that we are seeing there the dissolution of the imperialists. I think we have to arm ourselves rather for the Putinism remaining in power, especially if Ukraine does not win, and the regime procrastinating for quite a while. Yeah. So that's my take. On the can EU defend, or can Europe defend itself against Russia without the US? No. I mean, non-European allies give up to close to 80% of the military defense capabilities and military spending in NATO. So that means the US, which is close to 67%, and then followed by the UK and Turkey. Yeah? So that's why, yes, it is good if the EU builds relations with the UK also in the defense and military. Yeah. So just to say, I mean, without the US, under current circumstances, the EU would not be able to defend itself. Having said that, that of course also means that the EU needs to build more military capabilities, and it needs to reinforce its ability to take on more responsibility in the realm of security and defense. But that's another discussion, I guess. So.
Now part of the question,
yeah.
Will be Europe able to defend itself with Ukraine, together with Ukraine? Not with US, but with Ukraine.
With Ukraine?
Yes.
You mean when Ukraine is a member
yes,
a member?
With Europe, yes, together with Europe.
Well, assuming the US is still in NATO, then I guess the answer is yes. So, yeah.
Mr. Guetta, would you still like to
Militarily
answer
speaking, the European Union is weak, extremely weak. This is the reason why many people in the parliament, including myself, defend the idea for years and years of a common defense, of a European defense, and of European capabilities, because we cannot be sure for decades and decades that the United States will want to be involved in the defense of Europe. So we know the situation, we know the solution, but first, not everybody agrees on that, including in the European Union, and certainly including in Washington. And second, in any case, it will take years to build up a real European defense from scratch, or almost. So the situation is very difficult, and actually very frightening, because Mr. Putin is certainly ready not to invade the European Union, but to destabilize the European Union, and maybe, if it's possible for him, and it could be possible for him, to invade some member states of the European Union and NATO. Because I just said that the umbrella is not anymore a real umbrella. Don't say that in Moscow, please. They shouldn't know that, but actually they know that. Actually they know that. So the situation is extremely difficult. Actually the situation is frightening. And we have to build up a special relation with Ukraine. We have to build up the European defense very quickly. So again, let's forget the traditional accession process. This is not a solution. This is not a way We got to invent something new because I had to say so. But we are already at war.
Well,
Thank you for that.
Just with two fingers, because I mean, when you say the umbrella is no longer there, I mean, this could
Not
be
there.
Well,
It is not anymore an umbrella.
well. I mean, the NATO defense and deterrence umbrella stands. Yeah, stands, and we have the plans. NATO has the plans, and the means to defend Allied territory. Okay.
May I ask you
So-
a question?
Yes,
Even
you
with
may.
Trump?
Sorry.
Even with Trump?
Well,
Not for sure.
Well, that's a different discussion, but for now we have them. Yeah.
For 3 weeks.
I would not necessarily jump to your conclusions and the scenarios
No,
of
me
Trump.
neither, actually.
So I mean,
but
it's a hypothetical debate, but I mean, NATO has built up the defense and deterrence actually since 2014, and more importantly since 22, in order to make sure that Allied territory is safe. And this we also see when looking at the Russian posture. They are not planning and intending to attack Allied territory in the conventional terms. Okay. What they are doing, and I grant you that what they are doing is they conduct this shadow war below the threshold. Yeah. So we need yes, indeed, we need to build resilience. Next panel's topic, in order to address these shadow war threats. Yeah. But an open war against NATO territory, for now, no, because Putin knows that would be a very bad idea.
well, I would like to be really sure. I am not.
Okay, let's hope that we can get a bit more certainty on that soon. In the meantime, I see another question there in the back. There are two questions. Please keep them. There's another one behind you. So if you could keep your questions short, then I'll also ask for short answers because we have about 10 minutes left.
I come from Germany, and I consider myself as a watcher in the shadow. And I like your statement, the lack of strategy. And we have to find out a new strategy, and that changes a lot also in Europe. One point is we need a ceasefire as fast as possible, hopefully before 3 weeks, I'm not so hopeful. And the second point is we need a new European policy towards the East. And we have not to deal only with Russia, we have to deal with Ukraine in the first place, with Turkey, with Moldavia, Belarus, and maybe even Georgia. And we have to offer associated membership for all these countries in long negotiations. That's my proposal. And the question is, what can be done?
Thank you for that. Then we'll take the question behind as well.
Hello, I'm from the European Policy Centre. My name's Amanda. I want to return back to this issue of enlargement, because for me there is actually no middle way. The EU has tried before middle ways. We had the Eastern Partnership and we had the European Neighbourhood Policy. Neither of these worked, and to a large degree this is why Europe finds itself in the current situation, because we left in our Eastern neighbourhood grey zones. So having an alternative to membership will only, let's say, be a continuation of these grey zones. And I was quite surprised to hear you mention the other EPC, because we're also EPC, the European Political Community. as an alternative, because it seems, first of all, it seems to have disappeared totally off the radar. I mean, in the early days, President Macron was very enthusiastic about it. I think he was trying to promote it, actually, as you mentioned, some sort of other potential middle way between not being a member and being a member. But now, we don't hear anything about it. The last summit didn't take place in Moldova, it was actually in the UK. There was very little that came out of that, and there was very little that came out of actually the summit in Moldova. I mean, there was ideas to have a sort of common platform for a group of countries to talk about common issues, but there's been no follow-up. There's been no tangible results from any of these conversations, and what we've actually seen is a reduction of heads of state and government actually engaging in the meetings of the EPC. Certainly the meeting in London and Moldova, we didn't have the sort of gathering that was present at the first meeting. So for me, there is no alternative actually to further enlargement, and the EU has actually made a commitment to this. You can have what is much talked about, this sort of integration into different policies of the EU in between, gradual integration, that's the word. And this is good, this is a good thing, because it means that these countries can join the EU basically before being an official member, if I can put it that way, to a certain extent. But also I think the conversation that we're having here today is also rather narrow, because this is not just about enlargement, it's about the EU's role in the world, it's about the EU as a geostrategic or a geopolitical actor. Because by going back on our commitments, or potentially going back on our commitments to further enlargement, to not supporting Ukraine to the full extent where a victory can happen as soon as possible, because nobody wants a ceasefire and a victory more quickly than Ukraine, actually makes the EU look extremely weak in the world. We need to forget about ideas that we are an important player, because here's a wake-up call: the EU is no longer a major player in the world. Middle powers are rising, China is rising, and if the EU wants to be part of this game, it needs to make the right decisions vis-à-vis Ukraine and vis-à-vis the future of enlargement. And at the moment, I don't see this. And the comments that you made in particular, Mr. Guetta, would also give me the impression, would also signal to me that you consider enlargement not as a strategic priority for the EU, something that can be left on the back burner for many years, despite the global consequences this would have for the EU.
Thank you very much for those questions. I think we could have another half hour answering them, but I'm going to ask for short answers because we don't have that much time, unfortunately. But so the first question was about the need for a ceasefire, a new policy towards the east, and how to get there. If you agree with those points, I'm asking it to all speakers. And then the second, I'm going to rephrase it a little. Amanda, is the EPC sufficient, or should the EU really focus and make a strategic choice on going all the way and have that enlargement?
Okay, I just said in the Keynote speech, it was the last sentence, that we should use the tools of gradual integration to pave the way to accession. You understand, I guess, the sentence and the words. So let's come back to your lesson, because it was a lesson. If we use the traditional, the usual accession process, it will last between 8 and 20 years. It would be too long. It would be too long. It would be a real stupidity we have to walk faster, and very, very fast. How could we do that? With the usual accession process, it's impossible. So let's not say we should, because it will not happen. We have to find another way. Quicker, much faster. And the other way could be, could be the idea of the ECP, you say in English, European Community? EPC. Could be the EPC or some other ways. We have to invent. I said so 5 or 6 times in discussion. We have to invent something. And invent something for what? To go faster. Precisely. To be efficient in our resistance against Mr. Putin's imperialist views. So we shouldn't dream about wonderful policies. We have to integrate Ukraine tomorrow morning. It's not possible. So let's find something else. And it's not that difficult. And it's not that difficult. That's it. Thank you.
Yes, I will try to be brief. First of all, on ceasefire, because this is a very valid question. Let's not try to fool ourselves that immediate and quick ceasefire is just the best possible solution. And or after this so-called immediate ceasefire, next morning we wake up in a perfect world. No war is longer there. No, this is not what will happen. And this is exactly what Russia wants. For the moment, it's very clear for them that they cannot win this war on their terms. But they probably need a break. And what they will do, and this is what our military is reporting back to us, they are using these temporarily occupied territories as the Platzdarm. So they are preparing to continue this war with the collective West on their term. And if we give them this break, tomorrow or a day after tomorrow, they will hit harder. And probably the next target will not be Ukraine anymore. So let's just not really fool ourselves that the quick solution is the best solution. On the enlargement, I can't agree more with Amanda that any alternative solution is what Ukraine will consider. No, for us it's so very clear, and for me it's very easy to comment on that. Full-fledged membership is enshrined in our constitution, and of course politically we are more than eager and happy to engage in different political discussions on different or various solutions, but for us only full-fledged membership in the European Union, and here we insist on the smooth integration, indeed, is the only option. What helps, and this probably could be a solution, we need to think about the concrete timelines. It was mentioned by, if I remember well, the first one to mention this officially was Mr. Charles Michel. Let's jointly work for 2030. It's a very feasible and realistic target to accept Ukraine and welcome Ukraine as the full-fledged member of the European Union. If this can happen earlier, and I'm very well familiar with the bureaucratic and technocratic process of the accession talks. indeed, as I mentioned earlier, if there is a political way, if EU finds a better way to help Ukraine, assist Ukraine, and find more agile, also financial instruments to help Ukraine pass this very painful way of reforms in a smoother way, then yes, indeed, this accession can happen even earlier. But yes, indeed, we will never consider any alternatives for the full-fledged membership, also because we have record 97, 96 plus % of the support coming from the Ukrainian population for the full-fledged membership. And indeed, probably Ukraine's smooth integration into the EU is indeed what will help the EU to become the real geopolitical player.
Yeah, very briefly, I think Mariia said it all on the ceasefire. First, it's up to Ukrainians to decide whether that's the road they want to go down. We should not confuse ceasefire with peace, because it's not necessarily the same thing. Because in many ways, it can be an invitation to Mr. Putin to simply take a deep breath and rearm himself again for the next attacks. But in any case, it needs to be a process driven by Ukrainians. But even more important that the West, all Ukraine partners give Ukraine what it needs in order to win this fight. Because only then they are in a position of strength to negotiate what they can consider eventually a just and fair deal. Yeah? And we are not there yet, I think. And then on the enlargement, I think I said it before, I think we should see it as from a geostrategic perspective, yeah? On the EU side and the NATO side. And indeed, I mean, leaving gray zones, experience has shown us that this doesn't work, because, I mean, this is power politics. And in power politics, gray zones and vacuum don't exist. If you leave a vacuum, somebody else will fill it for you. Yeah? So, I mean, we have the choice. Or Europe has the choice, or NATO has the choice, whether we want to integrate Ukraine and become a more geostrategic actor, or we don't. Yeah? So I think that's at stake, and I think the EU is already on the way to reforming its integration process by adopting this sort of phased approach to the various baskets. Yeah. So once a basket is considered to be completed, then Ukraine or others can be considered members in that regard. Yeah. So I think this could be a way forward to speed up the process.
Thank you very much for those answers. And with that, unfortunately, I have to wrap up the discussion. But I think there's still enough food for discussion for during the coffee break. So I hope you can continue it there. But before we start with that, I would like to thank all the speakers that were joining this discussion. It was really very good. I very much enjoyed it, and thank you for joining us. And a warm round of applause, please.
Okay.
For those not engaged in those follow-up discussions, we are going to show during the coffee break a short documentary film called The Mayor. It's shot by our Office for East and Southeast Europe as part of the Think Freedom series. So they do portraits of inspiring and free-minded people from their region and beyond. And this one is about war veteran Volodymyr, who became the mayor of Chortkiv in Ukraine, a small town with about 30,000 inhabitants. And it follows him throughout the war and the difficulties that he has to deal with on the local level. So he finds that even civilian life has turned into a series of battles on the ground to keep shelters dry, to fix schools, to keep bacteria out of the water, but also to provide comfort and to comfort grieving families and give hope to fellow citizens. And all along, his phone keeps ringing. So we hope we'll put it on. We don't put the sound very loud, but there are subtitles, so you're warmly invited to see that. And on top of that, there's coffee served, so feel free to sit or stand wherever you want. And in about 25 minutes, we'll start with the next panel discussion then. Thank you.
Що хотіли?
Машину витяг.
Ага, що забуксували? Багато.
Завтра їх може йти спробуємо.
Просто попробуй, так? До машину тут бере там. Обійде поле, скажімо так, можна. А там з того боку, певно, буде гірше, там тільки цим боком пробувати. Десь в 16 років я мріяв працювати далекобійником, водієм, так як батько. А мама мені завжди казала, що дивись, як батько важко працює, важко. А ти вчися, поступай в університет. Я казав, ні, мамо, я ніколи не буду начальником, я ніколи не буду в краватці ходити, бо це якісь інші люди. Ні, я хочу бути простим, звичайним шофером, водієм, щоб не бути якимось там іншим, не відрізнятися. Але тоді мама була права. Так. Для підтеньки. Є? О! Отек паде! Падає! Це погано, бо колись були коні в селі. То була велика праця, то були коні. А тепер то мотоблок китайський. Багато шуму, але дешевше на руки. Але добре, що є люди. Є люди, вони повезли з лісу дрова, значить буде зима, а вони заготовляють дрова, значить буде тепло. І назбирали грибів, значить буде що їсти. Буде тепло і буде що їсти. Все буде добре. Тому і переможемо. Андрій, доброго ранку. Все дуже просто. Ти маєш список тих, хто постраждав в результаті того обстрілу тими ракетами російськими. Відповідно, там є бізнес, там є облік. От тих людей, які постраждали, тих бізнесменів, ти маєш звільнити ми маємо звільнити від рішенням сесії від сплати земельного податку і податку на нерухомість. Що тут складного? Є список людей, які постраждали. Шукай рішення. Так, шуму буде, це увага того лишнього. Але я це обов'язково завжди роблю. Тобто і тут посідаюся. Власним прикладом. Я бачу, йду по вулиці, що щось не там стоїть, або якийсь там, я його заберу. І я це роблю не для піару, не для того, що хтось там, я просто хочу, по-перше, воно було там чисто, а по-друге, щоб хтось, можливо, побачив і наслідував. Щоб не проходив мимо і бачив, це от погане лежить, сміття на дорозі, і просто проходив мимо. Це мене болить, коли вам все одно. Це найгірше, що може бути. Вуйко Стьопа, приберіть отут, будь ласка, прийдіть сюди, підмітіть оце цей. Вуйко Стьоп, отут нема кому прибрати, а тут накидали, приберіть.
Добрий ранок, пане голова.
Добрий ранок. Дай Боже.
Приємно, дуже приємно.
Що ви, на працю?
Так, вже працюємо.
Файно. Добрий ранок. Що за треш? Що за цегла? Що за треш? Юра, ти маєш жилетку? Маєш. Коли ми тебе в кадри вкладемо європейського телебачення. Добрий день. Ще би мав бути якийсь шапка, картузик, де написано КП «Благоустрій». Так подивляться болгари, бо німці на тебе скажуть, оце Юра молодець, привіт. А, ще, до речі, Тойота. Як справи?
Нормально.
Молодець. Молодець. Доброго ранку. Доброго ранку. Слава Україні! Ми в нашому центрі, там, де ми будемо робити зараз ремонт, соціальне житло для внутрішньопереміщених людей, у нас там немає простору для хабу. Нам треба знайти цей простір, цей хаб, де вони будуть себе відчувати, що в цьому місці, як мінімум, вони важливі. Як мінімум. От мер про них знає, муніципалітет про них знає, що він з Попасної, що він з Лисичанська, що в нього там 3 дітей, вона там би хотіла вишивати, але вона не має тої бумажки, без бумажки на роботу не беруть. Хтось, спеціаліст, має бути хоча б один з міської ради, який має тримати цю постійну комунікацію з цими людьми. Це хтось з вас це буде робити. Ось вас 5, хто тут присутній, ми все будемо говорити. Ми маємо подумати, хто і як ми маємо це вибудувати нашу політику по цих 3 головних проблемах, які ми не вирішимо до сьогодні.
Ми стоїмо на площі біля будівлі адміністрації міської ради. Далі всі з площі виходять, щоб нікого на площі не було біля будівлі адміністрації міської ради.
А куди йти, Володимир Петрович?
Можна по Бусковище Суму, можна в другу школу, хто куди бачить.
У Тернопільській області оголошено повітряний тривогу. Просимо всіх терміново перейти до найближчого укриття. Візьміть із собою документи та речі першої необхідності.
По Миколаєву є, Тернополю, по сторону Тернополя з Хмельницького прилетіло. Вони хочуть вибити все світло з нас. Вони б'ють по електричних опорах.
Кілька людей загинуло.
І вони правильно, а ми не поступаємося поки що, тому вони тероризують всю країну, щоб нас нагнути. Щоб люди сказали, все, ми за мир, але не за війну. Так.
Петрович, скажіть щось нам за подвір'я. Ну, двічі ми потопаємо, чесно.
Та й бачу, але якщо був в сьомій школі немає ні одного туалету. І от питання, дати гроші на ваше подвір'я чи дати в школі на туалети, скажіть?
Та ясно, що
Ні,
треба.
Якби хоча б
Зрейдурувати.
Це зберемо зараз. Щебінь зберемо, згорнемо, немає ніяких проблем. Я просто хотів би там подвір'я зробити, вчора нам дали доручення, щоб порахувати, але якщо я ніколи не був в сьомій школі в туалетах, я зайшов в туалет, там навіть перегородок між унітазами немає. Як це в 21-му тоді діти ходять в туалет? Я мені в самому стало стидно, якщо там був. Я ніколи не заходив, бо я знаю, що в школі більш-менш. Сьома. Я був я директор. Питаю його, що так? Він каже, так було. А діти ніколи не кажуть.
Так, ну то якщо то. Тодор Петрович, ми ще надіємо.
Та ми дорогу робимо правдами. Асфальту не буде цього року. Тільки бордюри і тротуари, а за гроші на асфальт нема. Все, тримайтеся.
Добре.
Па-па.
Петрович, якщо грайте з бастяна.
Добре.
Добре. Ми підсобимочуйте, мусимо щось зробити.
найцінніше, що міг би мати я в своєму житті, це бути обраним людьми. От, довірили. Людина йшла на дільницю і ставила плюсик. За шматька. Це ж наскільки... Ти ж не багато людей пішло на вибори. Це ж хтось, хто йшов на вибори, він вважає це місто з його історією своєю цінністю, своєю частинкою себе. Ну то давай, та в нас є чорткові геодезисти, та не Віталіка Кресінського попросити, приїде і виставить. Я не маю нічого проти, це ваше номер 2 завдання. Тобто мати такий момент. Бо ви мали таку історію подібну на Лепкого. До роддому. Будував Варчук. І він мені хрестився, а проєкт був дуже складний. Я що там робив проєкт, на кураж дається. Там, до речі, перепад 0,5 або 0,4. Там взагалі дуже маленький. Ви там бордюри. І він мені казав, що вода не буде стояти, я там нівелір, все. Він має слово дотримано 90%. Вода тільки в одному місці затримується. От вона там, ну, чуть-чуть в одному місці затримується. Так само тут. Якби десь тут буде якась стояти вода, то кого я крайнього питаю? Вас, кого? Коли ти людині пояснив, ти розумієш, що це 2 плюс 2 – 4. Він каже, чому це 4? Хто сказав, що це 4? Ну, хто сказав, що це 4? А може це не 4? Я кажу, ні, це 4. Ні, ми там погані, так як всі. Це не 4, ви не розумієтесь. Отут пече. От ти думаєш, ну, йолки-палки, ну, дайте мені точку опору, я переверну світ. А потім, окей. Йду на вибори, вибираю когось, але я таким чином ставлю свою цеглу в історію міста, чи села, чи громади. Далі та цегла має бути ще мати, і тоді буде якась стіна, буде якийсь будинок. І місто, де хлопці і дівчата, які закінчують школу, планують повернутися сюди назад. Куди ви? Ми їдемо жити. Куди жити? В Чортків, а чому? А там найкраще місто. Це моя мрія.
Накладна буде тоді, коли генератор переїде з-за кордону на кордон України. В кінці жовтня, а сам генератор до кінця листопада, 25 днів на поставку нам генератора після підписання договору. Розумієте, то не так все просто.
А другий?
А другий ще немає інформації, як має з вами поговорити і точно сказати параметри і для чого. Бо якщо по 169-й постанові купляти, то тільки захисні споруди.
На водоканал. Нам треба не 3 генератори, а 9 генераторів, щоб стабільно проходила система, якщо не буде світла. У нас був один водозабір, немає проблем. У нас Лавринова, стара насосна, хлораторна, камінна. Всі вони працюють, КНС вокзальна, КНС в парку, водоочисні. Якщо очисні буде працювати 2 години, 3 години без світла, всі бактерії вмруть. На очисні. Тому ми зараз шукаємо різні способи і гроші, щоб забезпечитися хоча б забезпечення водою. Бо ще якщо цим людям в місті не дати води, коли немає світла, я нині від 1000 дзвінків, смс-ок, повідомлень, коментарів, і вони все не розуміють. Так, от туди сують, так? Окей. Знімаю вже? Шановні жителі міста Чорткова, нашої громади, записую короткі термінові відеозвернення, щоб вам повідомити наступну інформацію щодо електропостачання у нашій громаді. Зараз буквально через декілька хвилин буде нарада про цю ситуацію, але змушений вам записати наперед це відеозвернення, оскільки ваші телефонні дзвінки, ваші смс-ки, ваші повідомлення до нас йдуть, і ми розуміємо, що ви не маєте інформації. Думаю, всі вже зрозуміли, що Московська Орда прийняла рішення знищити енергосистему України. Тобто зробити якийсь хаос у нашій країні, щоб ми всі погодилися на капітуляцію і здачу Криму. Ми цього не робимо ніколи. Я думаю, кожен з вас це розуміє. Тому цей час мусимо терпіти і бути сильними, тримати стрій в українському війську, як в тилу, так і на фронті. В армії здобув величезний досвід людських комунікацій. Я, по-перше, в армії дізнався більше про Україну, на війні, там на Сході, в Донецьку, в Луганщині, більше нічого до цього знав. А чому? Тому що в наших підрозділах служили з різних куточків. Хмельниччина, Вінниччина, Черкащина, Львівщина, різні люди різного віку. Від 19 років до 55. Це були взвод піхотний, а я командир. Всі ми в країні різні. Наприклад, свого підрозділу, роти, там, бригади. Ми ж були різні мобілізовані, з різними освітами, з різними знаннями. Але всі ми за одне. Тобто, неважливо, чи це був з Харкова, чи там з Донецька нами служили люди, які виїхали, пішли служити, приєдналися до різних підрозділів. Але вони всі були за те, щоб зберегти Україну.
Треба на годинку змістити похорон, один і другий. Перезвонити священнику, я балакаю з кучером. Ми не можемо зараз ризикувати тим, щоб проводити масовий захід коло цвинтара. Ні. Дзвоніть до рідних і кажіть, на 12 годину цей що на Кадубі, і там на 15 той, що на Синькові. Попередньо. Так.
З них 40 збили, а 30 не збили. І то це. І то біди наробили багато. 11 загиблих, 87 поранених в Києві. Значить, по Києву били, по центру, по Львову. Львів без світла. Це катастрофа.
Що його заб'ють другим?
Але коли? От питання коли, розумієте?
То вже не в крові, а такої нації українців не хоче ніхто. Колись німці не хотіли, тепер москалі і американці, я віця, але вони допомагають, бо вже сидять 40 днів, вибачте за слово.
Щоб два сини з одної хати. А одного вже похоронили тоді ще, а другий загинув. І тіла немає. І батько не вірить, що він загинув. Батько вірить, що він в полоні, що він прийде. Інтервалом 2 тижні. 2 тижні вони загинули. Що ще можна говорити? Як можна це ще коментувати, коли от така біда? Ніяк. Це страшна ціна цієї волі. Якийсь один момент була історія, коли в силу обставин я мав розносити ці повістки до сімей там в селі. І приїхав до одної сім'ї, які там дуже бідно живуть, так глибоко в лісі. Мама проста жінка, українська проста жінка з села, така справжня, щира, відкрита, сльозами на очах каже: я розумію, Володя, до мене на ти, бо я молодий, хоч я там і сільський голова. Я розумію, що ти приїхав по моїх синів, але прошу тебе, не забирай двоїх. От я народила 2 синів, одного залиши мені, одного віддаю Україні. І тоді в мені так все. Так. Я один в сім'ї, в мене немає ні сестри, ні брат. Але тоді я прийняв рішення, що я піду служити, я не буду більше повістки розносити, щоб не думали, що там я ховаюся за якусь посаду. У мене там донечці 8 місяців, моїй донечці там, відповідно, 9 місяців. Відповідно, ховатися за якісь там посади я не це. І прийняв рішення. Мама плакала, тато плакав, дружина плакала, всі плакали. Тому для мене війна і служба на війні – це там декілька фундаментальних змін відбулося всередині мене. Завдяки цим подіям. Слава Богу, що вижив.
Алло? Добрий день. Добрий, кажіть.
Прошу пана, вчора не було автобуса неділі. Діти приїдуть з тих, що поступали, і чим до праці, до автобусної, до Чорткова. Прошу пана, зробіть так, щоб виходив той автобус.
То не наші автобуси, ви не розумієте, що я на це не впливаю і не можу нічого зробити. Приватна власність, приватний перевізник. Хоче їде, хоче не їде. Нема людей, не їде. Двоє людей не їде, бо йому невигідно. Люди в неділю їздять дуже мало. Нема в нас комунального автобуса. Були б автобуси міські, ми хочемо купити, але треба 15-20 мільйонів гривень. І не можемо ніяк знайти ці гроші або позичити якомусь банку, кредит взяти, щоб ми не мали таких проблем з такими дураками. Не можу нічого зробити. Нічого не можу зробити. Нічого. Ви не розумієте, нічого не можу зробити. Я не Бог і, відповідно, зробити нічого поки не можу. Ми пробували з ним говорити, тиснути, він показує мені збитки. Людей мало в автобусі їде, і це все солярка, і це все збитки і збитки.
Я вас розумію дуже, але дивіться, як то самі знаєте, як дитина їде.
Це не найбільша проблема, не найбільша проблема. Через Чортки можна пішки пройтися. Поки треба так терпіти. Все, дякую Богу. Слухайте, пані, ну зараз мені не до того, дивіться, у нас зараз ракетний обстріл по всій Україні. Зараз я не до того, добре? Зараз немає як говорити. Сидіть, сховайтеся в укриття ліпше. Давайте. Я не святий, і це чесно. Зі мною теж є різні гріхи. Але я вважаю, що це не фундаментальні гріхи перед громадою. Це були різні обставини для різних цілей. Але що хтось мені заплатив гроші, там $1 за те, щоб рішення отримати, землю, майно чи щось, нема такого. І тому я ходжу по вулиці вільно, і я вільна людина, бо я вважаю, що я тим кроком не зганьбив посаду міського голови. Я себе не зганьбив. От себе. Є речі, за які мені соромно. Мене ті речі мучать до сьогодні. Я знаю про таких 3-4 речі, свої рішення, які мені соромно вже там багато років. 8 років, 9 років. Не за мною постійно йдуть. Вони є зі мною. Я їх не виключу в своїй пам'яті. Я пам'ятаю, що я зробив помилку на посаді сільського голови. Я зробив помилку на посаді мера. Я б ніколи б цього не повторив. Я думав, що це там зробив і забув. Ні. Це було неправильне рішення. Це була неправда. Я зробив неправду. Я зробив помилку. І вона за мною постійно переслідує мене. Я в тебе не втечеш. І коли люди цього не розуміють, коли ти їм кажеш, що це біле, а вони кажуть, ні, це сіре. Ну, можливо, воно і сіре, але де ж тих 50 відтінків? Це дуже тонка. Це не дуже... Я відповім на ваше питання. Ви мене спровокували, але відповідь на це питання. Ви мене спровокували. Але визнати помилку – це дуже цінно, коли ти сказав, що ти не правий. Ходи перед собою. І більше її ніколи не повторювати, це я вважаю великим досягненням кожної людини. Все. Інтерв'ю закінчено. Нам треба працювати. Нам пора працювати. Дякую. Хто я? Вважаю себе українцем щасливим. Трішки сентиментальним, емоційним. Один з українців, які не хочуть звідси в ніякому разі тікати, який хоче навчатися, який хоче вчити. Люблю шум, люблю емоції. Не подолавши свій страх, не подолав сам себе, не можу ніяк вивчити англійську мову, але точно хочу старатися бути якось правильним, якось жити по правді, не обманювати, не знаю. Живий поки. У вільній країні, вільній.
want, you can already sit.
We unfortunately only have 3, so maybe if I will, yeah, we have only 3 of those, but I think it's fine. I think I will just go like this. Is that okay? Yeah, okay. Super. Perfect. Okay. Hello and welcome. My name is Sarah Lissek. I'm a European Affairs Manager in the European Dialogue Program of the Friedrich Naumann Foundation for Freedom here in Brussels. And I'm very happy to welcome you to our second panel of the day, Beyond the Frontlines, Sustaining Ukraine's Resilience Amidst Conflict. So in the first panel, we focused a lot on the road ahead of Ukraine to join the EU and NATO, and specifically try to shed light on the benefits that Ukraine would bring with its accession. And now we want to focus more on Ukraine's very remarkable societal resilience against the kinetic war, against hybrid threats, and a load of disinformation. And we also want to take a closer look on the critical factors that contribute to Ukraine's ongoing resistance, but also identify maybe some potential areas of need. And we want to see if we can take some lessons learned from Ukraine's experience that maybe can be used in other European countries as well. So to address and discuss these topics, I'm delighted to have such a distinguished panel here with me today to discuss this topic a bit further. And I would like to introduce you to Mariia Barani, who's the founder of Promote Ukraine, who's also our partner for today's conference. Then we have Amanda Paul, who's a senior policy analyst and the deputy head of the Europe in the World program at the European Policy Center. And we have Alice Stormyer, who's the founder and executive director of Defend Democracy. Welcome to all of you, and thank you so much for being here with us today. So as we did in the first panel, we would like to have a relatively open and interactive discussion. So we will start with a round of introductory remarks and then open up to a discussion with all of you. So I would hand over first to you, Marta.
Thank you. Thank you to Friedrich Naumann Foundation for raising such important topic and for being such a great partner in the events. This is not the first time that we do events together, and always delighted that you raise these important topics. The sovereign, strong, independent state starts with a strong, sovereign people, with the will of the people. And the will of the people is expressed by civil society. So actually, there have been 4 times in Ukrainian history, 4 times in the recent history of the independence of Ukraine, where civil society got crystallized. It was in 1991, when Ukraine became independent, then in 2004, during the Orange Revolution, then Euromaidan, and now the full-scale invasion. That is when civil society became really a strong expressor of the will of Ukrainian people. In the conditions of this crisis, of different crises, and now of the full-scale war, Ukrainian civil society filled the gap that the state couldn't sustain, that the state couldn't do. Civil society, Ukrainian NGOs, activists became volunteers. They helped the state, the people, the frontline with humanitarian aid, with advocacy on the international arena. And that's how the civil society acted and reacted where the state couldn't. Many, let's say, civilians professionalized, and many young people became activists. And that lasted and lasts till now, but there is but. The war goes on. It went on, and like in the beginning, first few months, everyone was expecting that the war would finish as soon as possible, but Ukraine did not have enough weapons. Ukraine was not allowed to strike back. And there was a lot of frustration from society in large and also from civil society. And that frustration, when you cannot reach the enemy, that becomes an aggression towards those whom you can reach. And then who is reachable, who is the closest? Those who shine or those who are visible. And in many cases, these are the leaders of a lot of political leaders, but also the civil society leaders, opinion leaders, the activists themselves. They became often a target of the hate speech, a target of different criticism, and by that the society and civil society started eliminating themselves. So instead of uniting, many processes became like they were in parallel or they were duplicating themselves. These people who in the beginning of the war showed up or emerged as new political leaders could not be political leaders actually because of the lack of the political processes in Ukraine, such as elections, which is natural in times of war. But then these people are still there, they are emerged as leaders, and they were fighting or keep on fighting for resources and for attention, for media attention and for resources that are out there that the West gives, but also that Ukrainian governmental and political elites give. So they compete between each other for these resources, and by this again they eliminate each other. Instead of becoming more, they're becoming less. Another, it's also the part of the process that civil society NGOs are becoming gongos. They are not intentionally becoming governmentally operating non-governmental organizations because, again, as they compete for the resources, they get the resources from those who give them those resources, right? And then they have to bend under those who have their own private short-term interests instead of sticking to values and principles very often, because values and principles, when you stick with them, you lose a lot of support from those who are the interested parties in this processes. So there is a risk that civil society that should be the expressor or should express the will of the nation, of the people, becomes the one that expresses the will of the governing or the political elites, which is very dangerous in this situation. There is a gap of understanding who is leading the process. Is it the people? Is it there is the will of the people, or there is the will of political and governmental elites? So these are, I'm sorry to be not so optimistic as in previous panel, but I think that we should stay realist and we should speak what hurts, and if there is something to be done, we should actually remind the West that you should distinguish between what people want and what government and political elites want. Thank you.
Perfect. Thank you so much. I think that was really interesting to also get a bit more an understanding of the role of the Ukrainian civil society and the risks that are posed to civil society and their ability to express the will of the people. So I would hand over to Amanda next.
Thank you very much for the invitation to speak. For me, I always find it still staggering how resilient Ukrainians are. It's difficult to actually find another society anywhere in the world that has shown over a prolonged period of time the level of resilience of Ukrainians. I have friends who live in Kherson. As we know, Kherson is very near the front. I mean, they're attacked every day. And she is often asked the question, you know, how come you're still here? And there's a very simple answer to that. If we leave, if Ukrainians leave, Ukraine will no longer exist as a country. And some people look at you when you say that and think, oh, you're mad, that can't be correct. But it is correct. If Ukrainians leave towns, cities, other dwellings, these dwellings will be taken over by the Russians, and eventually it can potentially lead to not just a greater occupation of the country, but a potential, Russian victory in Ukraine. So they stay there because they want their country to remain Ukraine, a democratic Ukraine. And they're able to do this, as Marta just mentioned, actually thanks to Ukrainian civil society. I mean, I've been very lucky because I've had the opportunity to work on Ukraine for many years. It was a good career choice that I can recommend, that whole region. But during that period, I have really seen the evolution of civil society in the country. I mean, this dates back to first the Orange Revolution, then Maidan, and then this first-scale war, where civil society has become empowered. And this empowerment has allowed them to empower the resilience, actually, of other parts of society. I mean, we've seen this since the start of the full-scale invasion. I mean, I don't want to repeat what Marta said, but I mean, on the first few days of the war were so successful because of civil society, because they mobilized immediately in a way I've never seen before in my life, to be honest, and were able to respond to the needs not just of ordinary folk, but also the defenders. I mean, the troops that needed. They had many requirements at that stage, which the Ukrainian government simply wasn't able to provide. So they created a really important link to the forces on the front, and we've seen this grow and grow over the last 2 years. And this is the same when we look at different, societies. I mean, they have played a key role in strengthening the ability of normal people and societies to be able to be more resilient and exist by providing them with food, with healthcare, and making that sustainable, by being able to allow them to continue to actually work in different ways, by doing outreach to partners to be able to get support for Ukraine at different levels. And what's interesting, we've seen civil society work with local authorities and other grassroots actors to help them mobilize these things, because civil society has gone much beyond civil society. I mean, it's created volunteer networks, grassroots organizations, and other sorts of networks that are actually crucial on the ground to keeping Ukraine afloat, including economically afloat. Because we talk a lot about the actual military needs of Ukraine, but the economic needs are actually huge. I mean, the Ukrainian government for the last few years has been able to continue to pay pensions, salaries, and other benefits, a large extent also due to the efforts of civil society and other outreach groups pushing for Western partners to be able to continue to provide this sort of support. And this is really crucial, particularly moving forward. So I would say that, if we look at it, what does Ukraine need? I mean, Ukrainian civil society needs ongoing support from Western partners. I mean, there's a number of EU funding or European Commission funding lines, but these need to be made more robust. They need to have sustained support to be able to allow them to do their jobs adequately, in order to allow communities across the country to be able to stay or exist under these very difficult circumstances. I mean, obviously, first and foremost here as well is the ongoing military assistance. Another area that's been really crucial is that local actors and groups have been able to actually signal to their partners what communities need, what they need. And they've actually been able to help in terms of, let's say, the energy infrastructure, for example. Sort of volunteer groups have now become crucial in actually helping reinforce Ukraine's energy structure around the country. I mean, there's some areas where more could be done. For example, when it comes to wounded soldiers who have to be integrated back into their communities. This is one example where more assistance could be provided by Western partners to make this more, to make this easier, or to make it more sustainable. But overall, I think that the resilience Ukraine has shown is really commendable, and it's all homegrown. I mean, it hasn't come from, it didn't stem from Western assistance or from, let's say, exterior sources. It's been homegrown in the country, and it's acted as a reinforcing force to unite the whole country. There's no gaps or spaces anymore. I mean, Ukrainians all identify themselves, you know, as Ukrainians, united around one goal, and this certainly wasn't the case, let's say, 20 or 15 years ago. And this is also due to the important role that civil society has played. This is an important signal of resilience, that the entire country is united, and this will carry Ukraine through the next weeks, months, years, well, hopefully not years, of Russia's aggression against the country. So I will leave my remarks there.
Thank you very much, Amanda, especially for highlighting the different but very crucial functions that Ukrainian civil society performs, and also the need to support them, ongoing need. So, Elisa, I will hand over to you, last but not least.
Thank you. So I'm less of an expert on Ukraine, but I am I think I can say I am an expert on democratic resilience. When I was listening to the first panel, I realized we should really mind our language, because this is not just about Ukraine that needs to win. We need to win. It's about Europe. Ukraine is part of Europe. They are our family. So we need to win, and Europe needs to find its spine. My contribution is about finding our spine in a way. So let me start by citing Nobel Peace Prize winner Mariia. She says, when you don't have facts, you can't have truth. When you don't have truth, you can't have trust. When you don't have a shared reality, you can't have democracy. End of quote. I would like to add, when you don't have a shared reality, you can't have security. And this is really key, not just for Ukraine, but for us, all of us. So disinformation campaigns can impact our active participation in society, politics, and security. By overwhelming us with lies and falsehoods, disinformation campaigns can make us think that it doesn't matter what we do. For example, they can make us think that all politicians are corrupt, or that the EU is run by Brussels, or that Ukraine can never win from Russia. Now, as the philosopher Hannah Arendt wrote, the ideal subject of totalitarian rule is not the convinced Nazi or the convinced communist, but people for whom this distinction between fact and fiction and the distinction between true and false no longer exists. And that is why Russia and China spend billions of euros on propaganda. Not to make you believe something, but to make you believe nothing. So you do nothing, not even vote, and not even fight to defend your freedom and your country. So as the Belarus opposition leader, her name escapes me now, says, but we need democracy with teeth. So this was about just information, but Russia's weapon toolbox is much broader than just malign information campaigns. I'm not sure how familiar you are with the concept of hybrid threats. Sometimes it's called political warfare or active measures or sharp power. But it's really harmful activities that are planned and carried out with malign intent aiming to undermine a target, such as a state or an institution, through a variety of means, often combined. Such means include information manipulation, cyber attacks, economic influence or coercion, covert political interference, coercive diplomacy, or threats of military force. So it's a whole wide array of harmful activities, all the way from influence and interference to hybrid warfare. Now, since my organization started, Defend Democracy, our mission has remained the same, to strengthen and defend democracy against foreign, domestic, and technological threats. By 2020, I thought I knew all about the hybrid threats and what the Baltics, the Nordics, and then Ukraine taught us about the importance of whole of society resilience and preparedness. However, it wasn't until I actually visited Lithuania and Finland that I realized something important. A country like France, or my native country, the Netherlands, would never be able to simply copy-paste the Baltic or Nordic or Ukrainian approach to resilience and preparedness, because we never had Russia as our aggressive neighbor. So not only our geography, but also our country's histories, people's personal memories, and our security cultures are very different. So from these visits and many conversations, I grew the idea for a new program, bringing together governments and civil society from current and future EU and NATO countries to learn from each other's experience, expertise, and best practices countering hybrid threats. This program is called Coalition for Democratic Resilience. I'll skip a part to get to something else. One of the questions we as panelists were asked is like, what kind of attacks do we see in Ukraine that may or perhaps are already used on other EU member states? Well, what I always say is that authoritarian adversaries can and will use anything as weapons to undermine our democracy, unity, and society. So really, it's from rumors to sabotage, to AI, to corruption, to migration, to energy, to food or hunger, like anything, even cold. You know, when the winter starts again, Russia is always, and they did it before the full-scale invasion, they would also always threaten to close the gas taps. So countries can learn from each other to build that whole of society resilience and civil preparedness. And in particular, we can learn a lot from countries on the front line, like Ukraine and Moldova, like Finland and Lithuania. Let me skip a little part. Maybe I will quote something from which a Ukrainian member to our advisory board said in November 22, so that's a while ago, Libov Tsibulska. She said, in Ukraine right now, all of society and the government and businesses and the private sector, all parts are united. The crucial, and she says, security shouldn't be just the government's burden and government's task. Like obviously, any government should have a very well-built strategic communication system, but as you can see in Ukraine's case, all efforts are useful, especially when you are under attack. It becomes obvious how united we can be. Again, because this particular quote was about information, but I really want to emphasize that disinformation and even the so-called FIMI, like foreign information manipulation and interference, they are just the tip of the iceberg of hybrid attacks. So I know we have tons of panels on disinformation. Believe me, that's a too narrow focus. And when you listen to the assessments of security and defense experts, be they ministers or think tank people or whatever, we really have a window of opportunity to prepare ourselves, which is not that long. So we really need to get our act together and start to prepare this whole of society resilience and civil preparedness. Just to mention another example, the Dutch ambassador to Lithuania made some relevant observations. For example, he noticed that many Lithuanians have a packed bag near the front door. So unlike in the Netherlands, in Lithuania, it's perfectly normal to have a bag of essential goods ready at home. It contains battery, water, energy bars, and warm clothing, just in case people suddenly need to leave their homes. Not because they are afraid of Russia, but because they are prepared. Now, this preparedness is key, and as you may know or not, at the request of the European Commission, the former president of Finland, Niehus, is writing a preparedness strategy. It should be ready by the end of this month. Now, why did von der Leyen ask Finland? Well, because Finland has this so-called comprehensive security strategy. It is a collaborative model designed to strengthen societal and national resilience, bringing together vital parts of society and stakeholders. So all the civil society organizations and citizens have a role to play. And this collective awareness also increases feelings of collective security. And this is only possible when citizens themselves actively contribute. So to end, and I'm getting back to that, finding our spine, let me cite a recent study on societal resilience in the Baltic states. They, as a conclusion or summary, write, what does resilience at the society level look like? And their findings is that it's about strong national identity, it's about unity, about active civic engagement, about trust in institutions at every level, about social cohesion, and about a shared optimism for the future. That's my opening statement.
Thank you so much. That was very insightful, I think. So with that, I would open up immediately to the audience. So if you have a question, please raise your hand. And if you could introduce yourself just very shortly and maybe also say to whom the question is directed to. If not to everyone, then if you could say that as well, it would be great. If someone has a question.
Let me start. Dmitry Shkurko, National News Agency of Ukraine. Thank you for the floor. First question to Amanda, if I may. Before the war, EU declared that the most successful reform in Ukraine was reform of decentralization. Then some kind of local communities get some kind of power and resources to develop themselves. From your point of view, what kind of role of that kind of reforms had in common resilience of Ukrainian society, and what role it plays now? And to Marta, if I may, you mentioned that there is some contradiction between the power and elites and civil society. Right now, we have quite an active discussion outside and inside Ukraine on the possible compromises around the peace in Ukraine. So my question is, from your point of view, what kind of reactions could be from the civil society if the ruling government will compromise somehow with sovereignty and territorial integrity instead of peace? Thank you.
You said decentralization, right? I mean, honestly, I think this issue of decentralization was actually crucial during the first part of the war, because the Ukrainian leadership wasn't able to, to put it mildly, deal with everything that was going on. So local leaders actually had to play a really important role in preparing the residents of their towns, cities, regions for what was coming, and for mobilizing people to actually react. Also in terms of resources, economic resources, food, health service, they had to take on a much bigger responsibility for ensuring that these services actually continued. I mean, clearly there was still, ongoing engagement with the people sitting in Kiev, but their roles expanded considerably, and this went beyond Ukraine. I mean, the mayors of many different Ukrainian cities have, by themselves or as groups, reached out to their counterparts in the EU, with EU leaders themselves. They have been a key force in galvanizing support for Ukraine, and continue to do so across the country. I think we're all aware that the decentralization in Ukraine has gone, backwards. But I think that's a conversation for a different sort of meeting. But overall, without the innovative and very proactive engagement of local leaders, it would have been much more difficult for Ukraine to be able to respond so resiliently and proactively to the first days and weeks of the war. And I would like to add something that I forgot to add in the first comments, because it's coming back to the issue of civil society, and actually some of the new organizations that were created immediately or almost immediately after the war began. And in particular, I want to flag up the work of I think they call themselves a foundation now, but originally they started off as a grassroots Come Back Alive. They started off with maybe 2 or 3 people, and are now hundreds of people. I mean, the role of the Come Back Alive organization is to support not only society but the troops on the front. I mean, this organization, along with many others, have actually played a key role in Ukraine's resilience. They actually go to the front, they see what works and what doesn't work, and then they come back and they look for solutions to resolve it. That may sound quite complicated, but they've actually been extremely successful in doing this. They speak to the soldiers on the front line to understand what their needs are, whether it's food, if it's something related to their communities back home, their families, or whether it's related to Europe and in Ukraine. So we can't underline enough the fundamental benefits that Ukraine has actually received, the leadership, the support they've got from these sorts of organizations. That was a long answer to a short question.
Thank you for this question. So the question was about the contradiction between ruling elites or governments and the civil society. As I mentioned in my speech, which is actually call to action, that there are a lot of NGOs that are now serving the interests of those who have resources and those elites, and these civil society organizations that originally started as civil society organizations are actually extinguishing the mood of rebellion within the Ukrainian nation. There is this mood of rebellion. There are a lot of Ukrainian men who did not renew their data for mobilization. It's a failed mobilization process in Ukraine at this moment. There are a lot of people who are not satisfied with the political way how the politics is made in Ukraine. But there are, of course, civil society organizations that speak up and say that. But there are other that are actually extinguishing this mood and this spirit. So we have to be very much aware of this and looking into the reality and seeing that actually the people of Ukraine is a hostage of the political will of the West to help Ukraine. Of this time, plays against us, and the fact that Ukraine did not get weapons in the beginning with the speed, did not, now also is not allowed to strike back, that all plays against us. And again, the rebellion is there, and it might come up any time when the bad decision is made, like giving up the territories of Ukraine. There is too much blood spilled. I don't think that Ukrainian people will forgive, will just let it, that a lot of families lost the members, a lot of people lost their friends, and they will just let it go. Then what was this all for?
Another question? Take.
Hello, my name is Carsten Geyer. I have a question I'd like to ask in a personal capacity. We've heard a lot about the importance of civil society, and we've heard a lot about the role civil society is playing in Ukraine. And that some of it is realistic and some of it is very encouraging. I'm wondering if there's a way of utilizing the strength of the civil society in bringing an end to the conflict in Europe. Because one of the things I've noticed is that the government in Russia is trying to repress any free information about the war, and is going to great lengths at repressing any opposition. And so this leads us to getting data like 75–80% of all Russians support the war. And I'm wondering if there was a way of better communicating, not from the government, but maybe through civil society, that could quietly undermine these Russian efforts. So the question really is to Marta, but maybe also to Alice, and then Amanda, I don't know if you want to comment. Is there a way of utilizing the strength of Ukrainian civil society to undercut basically the Russian internal political rhetoric on this war? Thank you.
Thank you for this complex question. I will answer with an example, and that also leads to, like, that example has a connection to what Alice said in the beginning. In July, we wanted to organize a travel of the 3rd Brigade, Ukrainian 3rd Brigade, here to Brussels, so that they could speak to Ukrainians, but also to other people about their experience in the war actions and experience in the victory, actually, in the victory on the ground. And that could inspire people to help Ukraine more. So the 3rd Brigade was about to come, and Russia Today interfered with their disinformation, saying that the 3rd Brigade is actually Nazi, a Ukrainian Nazi from Azov, and they are coming to Brussels, and Brussels is going to host Nazi, and so Promote Ukraine is like facilitating the process. The whole media picked up the narrative here in Belgium, and the event was about to be cancelled. It was to be hosted in our partner's space, and our partner's space just called us and said we are going to cancel because the mayor of that commune, of that municipality, launched the call to the police. So there are like a lot of things happening. We Promote Ukraine, we reached out to media saying that, hey, you wrote everything about this event without reaching out to us. You did not ask for any comment, and now the event is about to be cancelled with a bad reputational damage. So media started actually calling us and talking to us, and then the narrative changed. And they took our comment as, yeah, they are not Nazi, they are indeed the 3rd Brigade is a part of Ukrainian armed forces. They are coming here not to recruit people, but they are coming to inspire and to share their stories. And we managed to keep the event it was not anymore going to be cancelled. We talked to the mayor, we talked to the police. Police decided to help us with it even. And then Ukrainian side withdrew, and Ukrainian government gave the order to the 3rd Brigade not to come to Brussels anymore. And when we learned that, it was like 2 days before the event, we learned that, the media learned that, and the first narrative came again. So you see, if they are withdrawing, then there is something, then there is the first narrative was right. Then we were not able to communicate anymore in a proper way, and it was not like our governmental bodies sort of gave up to the Russian disinformation, and we lost this information fight. That is answer to you. We have to be resilient as not only civil society, but as a whole society, police, mayors, and everyone. We have to be aware. The media, especially media, has a role to play. If they receive the information from Russia today, they already have to question, is it the right information, and they have to talk to the organizers and to those parties involved. So we should learn from this experience, and we should keep on resisting and building alliances between NGOs, but also between different parts of society.
Yeah, I would like to complement that answer, because my answer goes in the same direction. Of course, Ukrainian civil society has this fantastic resilience. So, yeah, at first sight, it may make sense to look to them for, helping to address Russian, intransparency about numbers and so on. But they already have so much on their plate. So. It's also up to us to do this work and to remain engaged and to keep standing on Ukraine's side, not just for however long it takes, but for Ukraine and for us to win. So we need to become more active. It's in our own interest. It's in Ukraine's interest, but it's definitely also in our own interest. And I agree that beyond civil society, the conventional media also has a role to play. It's like flabbergasting, like how little contextual research conventional media is doing these days. And one more thing, because this is about the topic of information, I would like to re-emphasize a point that Defend Democracy often makes, is that we cannot allow our digital infrastructure to be so dependent on a few American billionaire monopolies that may have actually a political agenda. It is irresponsible, not just for our democracy, but also for our security. That's a whole other discussion. I'm happy to expand on that bilaterally or at one of our next events, but this is really, really key.
If I may add to this, there is in Russia, unfortunately, despite the best beliefs that there is opposition, there is no opposition in Russia. And there cannot be opposition because Russia, whatever Russia now projects to the world is evil, and there cannot be opposition to the evil. There is only resistance. There is no resistance in Russia, so there is no opposition. And we, a Ukrainian civil society, but also the West, we have no choice. We have no choice because Russia is all on the now on the military rail. Their defense minister is the economist who actually put even the so-called opposition, if they go through if they realize the justice process, then we can talk about some sort of peace.
Maybe just briefly about Russia. I mean, I think the situation in Russia is rather complicated. I mean, first of all, many of those who oppose the war left the country early on, either because they opposed it or they didn't want to be mobilized. We all know there's no free information in Russia. It's difficult to actually really understand what percentage of Russian society actually opposes the war. But I think it's also a fact that a large part of Russian society does support the war. And of course you can say this is because of Russian disinformation and the ridiculous narratives that Putin and his group of cohorts spread. But also we can't also dismiss the fact that imperialism still exists in Russia and in Russian DNA. So for many Russians, they actually feel that they have a right to go and invade territories which they still consider to actually be rightfully theirs. There is this part of Russian society that still thinks like this. But there's also a bigger problem here, is that Russian society still hasn't really felt the consequences of Putin's war in Ukraine. I mean, the sanctions that have been put on Russia, they've had some impact, but they haven't had enough of an impact to actually bring people to the streets, if that's even feasibly possible now in Russia, or to, I don't know, create, let's say, create a sort of wave in that direction. They're still too limited, and Russia has been able to adapt to these sanctions. So I do think that part of the strategy going forward needs to actually be to make it much more painful for ordinary Russians to tolerate this war. I mean, as an EU national, I mean, I find it staggering that mothers and families can be, I wouldn't say happy, but not concerned about sending their sons off to the front because they're going to get $5,000 or $10,000. I mean, this for me is like a completely different way of life, but this is what's happening. So the key here is still making it more difficult. I mean, I was at an event yesterday where I didn't know this, but apparently now the EU is buying a lot more LNG from Russia. I mean, they've switched out. It's not a known fact. I mean, pipeline gas doesn't come anymore, but now we're one of the biggest, well, not me personally, but the EU is one of the biggest purchasers of LNG gas. I mean, how is this possible? I mean, this is, again, money going into the Kremlin's coffers, among many other things, and it's not serious. And this really demonstrates to me, again, the lack of strategic vision, the lack of understanding of how high the stakes actually are here.
Yeah, thank you very much for that. I saw that there are two questions in the back, so maybe if we take yours, a very short question and short answer so we can finish on time.
Perfect, thank you. Good afternoon. My name is Anastasia. I'm doing the traineeship with the European Parliament. Thank you so much for such a brilliant exchange, first of all. And my question will go to Alice, as you mentioned the hybrid warfare and how we can address the premises of this. So as far as I understand, the resilience is sort of the concept that goes in a more reactive approach than proactive. And picking up on the story that Marta just shared with us, how much effort and energy Promote Ukraine put in the battle that was not supposed to be even there. So do you think that maybe the hybrid warfare and how we are sort of approaching this concept should be revisited and changed so that we can go more proactive in this regard? Because as you mentioned, the Ukrainians have a lot on their plate. And on the top of that, they are fighting the Russian disinformation that just keeps making inroads across the EU, and everything seems to be like fine with that. So what do you think? Shall we maybe come up with a different approach to how hybrid warfare should be tackled on our end? Thank you.
I would love to, that we are more proactive. I think, and referring back to the first panel, this is, I would say, in part, still a lack of awareness or assessment of how urgent and vast the situation is, also for not just Ukraine, but again, also for our security. So still, I would say, even though, you know, many governments and leaders have woken up finally in February 22, still, I would say that several would just love to go back to business as usual as soon as possible. But that won't be possible. There is no going back to business as usual. So I think I would love to see that we are getting our act together and that we are becoming more proactive. But that's a question of political will and of courage and of finding our spine. And again, given the window of opportunity that we have, I hope we will find it sooner rather than later.
Thank you. Thanks a lot. I think looking at the time, I would then close the discussion, but I think there will be time for more questions, maybe during lunch as well. So I would like to thank the panelists. Thank you for coming, and it was a really great discussion. And also on behalf of the Friedrich Naumann Foundation, thank you all for coming. It was really a pleasure. And then I would hand over to Marta, though, for some closing remarks on behalf of Promote Ukraine.
Thank you. Yeah, great discussion. Great that it is recorded. There is one case that I wanted also to mention about the civil society and about the resilience and about the how we fight the disinformation without spending too many resources of those who already fight other fights. There are NGOs that are whitewashing their reputation, and we should also pay attention to those. There are a lot of foundations, a sort of foundations or NGOs that are coming here, even to Brussels, and Brussels hosts them, thinking that they are actually doing good because they are Ukrainians, talking about the war in Ukraine, talking about some people suffering. But when you dig deeper, you see that the founders of those foundations or those who sponsor them are either former politicians in Ukraine who served Putin's interests there, or people who just stole money from Ukrainian people and ran here to the West. We have to check. We have to check more what we do before we do. Not to there is a lot of naivete from the side of the West that has to. We keep on fighting this naivete, and we have to pay attention to what the generals are saying, the military generals are saying, pay attention to what people on the ground are saying, because they see the risks that the society in large doesn't see. So my call to action would be support Ukraine more, do faster, do it fast, do it good, but also, or maybe first of all, sustain yourself more in terms of defense and all types of defense, military defense, but also defense against hybrid threats. And raise awareness among your people, among just society, maybe in the schools, at university, lectures, lessons, whatever is possible. Take Ukrainian NGOs as partners, or Ukrainian, those who already have experience on the ground in Ukraine as partners in these projects, because they know what they talk about. Don't be scared to look ridiculous when you talk about civil defense, for instance, how to defend yourself in case of the invasion or in case of other emergency situation, or if there is critical infrastructure hit in Brussels. You would sound ridiculous if you offer today to make the project like this of civil defense, because people would be scared. But don't be, because if we are scared, then there is no one else left to prepare people.